get there, please start by typing your name in the box so I know who's doing it. Today's date is February 2nd, 2021, Groundhog's Day. Bad news, Punxsutawney Phil did see his shadow. That means we've got another 6 weeks of winter. But yeah, what are we doing today? Sedimentary rock review and ID. Nice, relaxing way to get into the new term. Do now says open up to page 7 in your Earth Science reference table. I want you to name a sedimentary rock and give a fact about it and post a picture. So let's go through a couple of these. Rihanna said shale. Shale is a fine layered rock. Actually, if you drop it on the table, it could peel apart and break out into layers. It's one way you can tell what it is. Jocelyn said limestone, typically white in color. Marjorie said the same thing. It's bioclastic. Remember, bio means life. So at one point, that limestone was alive in the form of either animal bones or in the form of seashells. Dion said breccia. Breccia's got angular fragments. I said conglomerate. It's got rounded fragments. Tara said gypsum. So gypsum will actually create rock gypsum, which is the sedimentary rock. She mentioned the mineral that makes it up, but let's be honest, they're really one and the same. All you got to do is pressurize it. So when you get that mineral and you take it and you bury it, and maybe subject it to a little bit of water, maybe a tiny bit of pressure, it'll start to form into that separate rock. Steph said siltstone, very fine grained sedimentary rock. We got another conglomerate. We got sandstone. So Samai mentioned sandstone, how it has a very sandy texture, fine textured sands. All right, cool. Spent forever on this, but we're going to move forward. Earth Science reference table with you. It's not the end of the world. I did post a copy of this completed form, or this completed document, so you'll have all the annotations if you can't copy them down on your actual reference table. But please, I'm asking you to take the time and actually hand write those out. Because when you do have them written down on the document, when you are taking a quiz or a test, you'll have them available to you. So let me grab my drawing slate. So let's take a look here. So just to review some of the categories that we have, under texture, we have 3 primary groupings. We've got classic, crystalline, and then bioclastic. Now I know there are 4 on here. That last one is crystalline or bioclastic, but really it's just a combination of these 2. Now, probably the most important thing with identifying these rocks is the grain size. So grain size is relating to how big the particles that make up these sedimentary rocks actually are. Now, if you remember, sedimentary rocks are made up of smaller rocks that existed before. Sediment, right? That all got glued together or cemented together. Now, there's a couple terms that we have to be aware of, and I think we kind of take them for granted. Like, for example, the word pebbles. How big is a pebble? Well, basically, if it's the size of a large particle of sand, or maybe let's say a grain of rice, all the way up to the size of a football. So these things have pretty wide ranges of sizes. Where cobbles, those are essentially the size of a football. So it's football size to about the size of a boulder, which would be something along the lines of 1 meter. Right? And then anything that we're talking about as far as boulders, it's about 1 meter across. By the way, as far as pebbles are concerned, we do have another term for them. We sometimes call them gravel. It's all the same. I'm actually going to switch to a different color so it makes it a little more visible. Next up, you got your composition. The composition of all these guys is basically the same exact stuff. They're all made of quartz, feldspar, clay, some other rocks and minerals. The comments identifying them really would help you separate them out. Not just the size, like for example, conglomerate and breccia. They're both made up of particles this size. Pebbles, cobbles, boulders found within sand, silt, and clay. The difference between the two is that conglomerate is rounded fragments, whereas breccia would be angular. Sandstone is fine, siltstone is even finer, and shale is like baby powder smooth. So you see, as you go towards the bottom, the particle size will be small, and if you move to the top, these guys are going to be big. Okay, now this is important. I need you to, and I'm just going to erase this so we have some more space here. I need you to write down the environment of formation. So for conglomerate, those are rocks that have been rounded over time. Can anybody call out a place, you can type it in the chat, where rocks over time start off angular and then they slowly round over? Are we looking at the desert? Are we looking at the mountains? Are we looking at the beach? Are we looking at beautiful rivers? So rivers are the classic example. But not just rivers, it could also be streams. And to a limited extent, the oceans. And when we say oceans, what we're really referring to is the beach. Because if we're on the ocean floor, there's really no movement of that water, or very limited movement, so that wouldn't help. Now, breccia. Where might we find angular fragments? Well, if smoothed off rocks are found in wet environments, call it a biome, or an area on Earth where we might find angular rocks. No guesses? Yeah, right, Tara. You definitely find it on land. But in this case, I think the best would be desert or the mountains. Deserts in particular, because those environments are dry, so there's really no way for it to round off. But also mountains, because what happens to that rock that's sitting on top of the mountain? Well, as there's a rock on top of a mountain, eventually gravity is going to take hold and bounce down the side of the mountain. Cracks open, sharp edges. Some people were saying last period volcanoes, and I could see that. Yeah, rock falls, let me know. Some people were saying volcanoes. The only problem with volcanoes is volcanoes are igneous rocks. This one we're really referring to sedimentary. Okay, sandstone, where do we find sand? Simple answer would be the beach. To a limited extent, deserts. But primarily the beach. You do need some water to form rocks, and if you're in a desert that's so dry where it's essentially just sand, you're probably not going to be forming much rock. Siltstone. So silt is just very small sand. And where do you make sand even smaller? Probably in a river. Now you might think, well, what about the beach? Well, the problem is at the beach, the water's always pulling out to sea, so it's going to drag that silt out into the ocean. So you wouldn't find silt so much at the beach. So really only rivers and stream. And then lastly, shale. If you've ever been fortunate enough to swim in a river, I'm sorry, not a river, in a lake or a pond, you'll know that when you stand up, the bottom of the pond or the lake, it's baby powder smooth dust, and it all just settled to the bottom. Now, how did that happen? Well, if the water is not moving, the sediment that's suspended in it, that brown floaty sand or dust, clay, will eventually fall out, but it does take a while. So in this case, it would be lakes, ponds. All right, next up we've got our crystalline. All the crystalline ones are going to be formed In dried lakes or old dried up inland seas. The classic example is the Bonneville Salt Flats. I think we spoke about them last week in Utah. You might have heard of Salt Lake City, right? Well, Salt Lake, it's one giant lake that, as time goes on, there's less and less water in it. And all the salt that's dissolved in solution, that's sitting inside that water, remains behind while the water evaporates away. So every year it gets more and more salty. And then eventually we're going to be left with no water there and just a big pile of salt. And that works also with rock gypsum and dolostone. We find this with the Aral Sea. I think that's in Kazakhstan. And then our last one is our ones that used to be alive. Remember, bio means living. And we've got limestone and bituminous coal. Little reminder, limestone, generally speaking, is white or off-white. And bituminous coal is generally dark brown or more usually black. One other thing is that the limestone is made up of calcite, and we know that calcite reacts with acid. So bubbles with acid. And carbon can burn, right? That's another thing. We know that it's made of compacted plant remains. So if you find a plant fossil, you know it's going to be coal. If you find seashells, you know it's going to be limestone. Limestone, environment of formation. Oh, it's seashells, so it's got to be the beach. And bituminous coal is plant remains, so we're going to say swamps and forests. And that's it for locations. All right, so I've made a similar annotation and posted it on the Google Classroom. You can go download that there. This link here, it brings you to a form. So I'm trying something a little bit different. Instead of doing a lab where you have to type everything out, in this case I want to do it as like a form on Google Forms. Maybe it'll make the grading a little quicker for me. So lab number 14, you have 8 rocks to identify. Sedimentary rock number 1 we're going to do together. So what kind of sedimentary rock is this? Well, taking a look at it, I see rounded particles. So right off the bat, since I can definitely see those are large ones, I'm going to think conglomerate. And all we got to do is go to ESRT, page 7. I'm just going to pull up a copy. And if we head down to 7, we can see right here, rounded fragments are conglomerate. What evidence support your claim? Actually, you should probably say rounded pebbles in a matrix of sand, silt, and clay. Simple as that. You also notice that the point values are listed, so you get 1 point for identifying if it's correct. That's pretty simple, just taking a look at it. Explaining it, I figure you can get 2 points. And then going in depth, giving me some reasoning as to why do you think that's what it is, and what is the environment of formation. So, for example, was it formed in a river, a desert, ocean? Well, we can definitely go back to the annotations that we did before. So we could say that it was most likely formed in a river or stream. And what evidence or clues do you have for this? The pebbles appear to have been rounded by moving water. You don't have to write a full story. I wrote 2 sentences here. If you're writing more than 4 sentences, you're probably writing too much. All right? But just give me an idea of what it possibly is. All right, and that is it.